Anna Lay, and I am the Assistant Outdoor School Coordinator with the Calapooia Watershed Council. In this video, I'll be going over a soil rubbing activity which will give us an insight on the makeup of soil and how different types of soil influences texture. So stay tuned, and then hopefully you all follow along at home. So before we dive right into the activity, I want you all to keep in mind that we are talking about 3 types of soil: clay, silt, and sand, all of which will affect soil texture, which I mentioned before, but throughout the video I will be honing in to specific details, primarily the size of each soil particle or soil grain and how that may affect soil texture, which in return will affect other aspects of the environment and our day-to-day life. First and foremost, why is it important to know the type of soil we have? Well, it helps us better understand how we can take care of it and sustain it. Soil is important because we encounter it in our day-to-day lives, even if we don't recognize it. So to help you better visualize what I am talking about, I will be walking you through different habitats and different areas. Go for a hike in a forest surrounded by towering trees and shrub. This environment is really important in providing us with oxygen that we breathe and also habitat for wildlife. This environment is a really good example of where you can most likely find clay, which has a high water holding capacity, meaning that if there's a rainfall or a stream bank, water will most likely be able to retain or stay inside of the soil and keep moisture in. And drainage is very slow, meaning the soil is slow to dry out during hot weathers. Clay is also really good with retaining nutrients, so any nutrients that is recycled back into the soil will stay a lot longer compared to sand or silt. Office. So here I have some Play-Doh or moldable clay. This is the one I made at home, and you can find some online resources for that. So here I am forming it into a ball, messing it up with my hands to see how it acts, how it kind of holds its shape. As you can tell, it's very malleable. Any shape I want it to go, it will budge. It doesn't break apart, and it's very soft. And yeah, so this is a good representation of what clay feels like. And then next up, let's take a quick walk in a park in this lovely rose garden since it is springtime. This will be an area where you will find some silty soil. What that means is that it's on the medium side of things. This soil is good with water retention, so holding water when you're watering your plants, and then air circulation, so allowing air or oxygen to get into the roots so plants can grow. I have a bowl of white flour. I love baking, especially right now, so found this in my kitchen pantry, and this is a good representation of silt. Again, forming it into a ball, or trying to. As you can tell, it doesn't act like clay, and so it doesn't really hold its shape. It's very powdery, very fine. It kind of leaves behind a residue on my hand. So this is the same thing as what silt would do if you were to have a lot of it in soil. So this is something to keep in mind if you want a reference to what silt feels like. Put my label there. Let's take a trip to a farm where our fruits and vegetables come from and are grown. In this location, you will primarily find sandy soil, which is used for plowing, planting, and cultivating our fruits and vegetables. Some vegetables that thrive in this kind of environment would be potatoes and fruits such as tomatoes. Sandy soil is really good in drainage, meaning that if you water the soil, the water won't hold as easily, but then it also has poor nutrient retention, meaning that any fertilizer or any nutrients that goes into the soil will most likely not stay as long. And then next up, I have a small bowl of your standard table salt. Playing it with my hands, kind of see the movement of it. It kind of bounces. It's a much larger size compared to the silt, and compared to the clay, it doesn't really hold its shape, and compared to the silt, it doesn't even leave a residue behind. When I'm feeling it around, it feels a little gritty, feels a little tough. So I would say this is a really good representation of what sand would feel like. Next up, I have a pile of vegetation or leaf litter that I picked up from my backyard. I have some leaves, some twigs with some moss on it, some seeds, anything that I can pick off the ground. This is a really good example of what organic material is. Anything that used to be living that it's now decaying or decomposing, something that goes back into the soil. So humus is a makeup of organic material that goes back into the soil. That's something to keep in mind. And then next up, I'm going to move all of these materials aside so I have more room for my next soil category, which is loam. Loam is comprised of a bunch of soil or type of soil mixed in. So it would be equal parts of silt. In this case, it is the white flour that we have here, and equal parts of sand, which is the table salt. I'm gonna mix those two together, and a very small proportion of clay. If you want to think about it, it would be 40% silt, 40% sand, and 20% clay. Sometimes humus would be mixed into it, but for the most part, this is what loam is made out of. So again, you can use all these materials that I have laid out here for your reference moving forward with this activity. So all in all, this activity, diving into more about soil texture and learning a little bit more about soil and how each environmental service is affected by soil, will ultimately give you an oversight and a better understanding of how we can use our water wisely. So as I went through the different areas, such as the park, the farm, and the forest, each of those habitats contain different soil, and how each soil really influences the water usage and also the herbicide and insecticides that we apply to those places. In order to continue, taking care of the earth and moving forward with sustaining our soil, it's really important to understand the soil that we have. So hopefully this video will give you a better understanding of how you can look into it and then follow along with the activity to learn more about it. So we are on the soil collecting portion of this video. I will be collecting some soil in my backyard, but I will also be walking through materials you may need and then where you can find soil. Here I just found a ceramic bowl from my kitchen cabinet and then a small shovel that I have lying around. So I'll be using those two materials to collect soil. You can use a plastic container, maybe an old mason jar. Your hands will work just fine, but if you're not comfortable touching the soil, you can use some gloves or even a metal spoon that you have in your drawers. Here's my backyard. You are more than welcome to, find some soil in your local park or even in your neighborhood. Just go for an evening stroll, and then if you have soil lying around, feel free to use that. But you're not looking for anything specific. But this is just me showing you the plot of land that I have and an easy access right out of my, backyard. I'm showing you the type of soil that I have. It's kind of dry, which is what I'm looking for. Not a lot of vegetation in it. And yeah, I'll just use my shovel to take a giant scoop out of it and then put it inside of my bowl. And then this is when I realized there's a bunch of creepy crawlers in there. I dumped it back out and kind of, do a round two, thoroughly check that I'm not bringing any hitchhikers inside of the house. And it looks, good to go. Back into here I have the influence of texture chart and soil texture table in front of me. We're going to be talking about the soil texture first and continue using this as a reference as we continue on with this activity. So again, soil texture is the amount of sand, soil, and clay in a given soil sample. And here you have the name of a soil in one column and the diameter or size of the soil in another column. And first off, I will bring back my bowl of salt, or in this case, it represents sand, and talk a little bit more on why it feels the way it does, and talking about the soil texture and the diameter and relating it back to the chart. So again, here I have my chart, and as you can see, it goes from very coarse sand to very fine sand. It ranges from 2 millimeters to 0.05 millimeters, making this the largest size sediment in diameter. And then next up, we're gonna bring back the white flour, in this case the silt. Kind of made a mess. That didn't really work in cleaning it. So yeah, back to the silt. Looking back at our soil texture table, it looks about 0.05 millimeters to 0.002 millimeters. So it's pretty much in the medium range, not too big, but also not too small. We're going to call this the medium size sediment. And then bringing back the clay. Here we have the clay. And then taking a look at our soil texture chart, you can see that clay is the very last one and is less than 0.002 millimeters, making it the smallest out of all of the soil content that you can have. Here we have the influence of texture charts. You can print this out and go back to it. So here we're going to be talking about water holding capacity, aeration, drainage, nutrient retention, and how sand, silt, and clay kind of influences each of the environmental services that we have. So we learned about soil texture and diameter, but if we look at soil texture and diameter and what we learned, we can really understand how that would influence the texture and in return influence the environmental services. So, sand, silt, and clay, looking at water holding capacity and seeing how each diameter would affect each of the category. So first off, let's look at water holding capacity. So silt has a medium effect on water holding capacity and clay has a higher capacity. So if we mix both silt and clay, that would kind of, retain or hold water more often. So sand has a lower holding capacity and silt is medium. So if I mix both the sand and the silt, I would say that the silt clay mixture would have a higher influence in holding water compared to the sand and silt. I'm going to go ahead and start with the activity. I will be showing you some materials you may need for the soil riveting activity, something to keep the area clean. I have a spoon here, but I'm just going to use my hands to pick up the soil, a nice big bowl to just capture all of the soil particles and water, a spray bottle. You can also use the spoon to just put droplets of water into your soil sample as you're conducting the activity. And then nice clean hands, just a reminder to continually wash your hands so you're not contaminating your soil with each sample. And then just a nice dish rag or a washcloth or a paper towel would work to keep your area clean and then to wipe down your hand. So let's go ahead and take one of our soil sample. Here I have a massive bucket of soil. So I'm just going to take a handful and place it in my palm. And then take my spray bottle full of water and then just spray evenly as I am massaging it with my one hand. Keeping it in mind about the things that we talked about before, such as, soil texture, what it feels like, even using colors. I like to just switch from hand to hand. So if your other hand is getting really dirty and wet, I would switch to my dry, clean hand and just keep massaging it back and forth. So you're going to continue doing this until you form a small cylinder the size of your hand. And then make sure to just constantly wipe down your hand if it's wet and muddy. You want to clean hands as much as possible and clean dry hands because your hands is kind of acting as a sponge to soak up the moisture. And what you're trying to form here is a cylinder that sticks together and is kind of dry. So if it continues sticking to your hand, you don't want that. So just switch back from hand to hand and then use your towel to dry off as much as possible. So once you have something that looks like something you might find in a yard and it kind of holds its shape and has a consistency of what putty should feel like, you should be good to go. As you can tell, it's keeping its shape and then both of my hands are staying dry and then not as muddy as it was before. So I think this should be good to go, and then we'll repeat the process with the other samples that I have. So I am bringing out a couple more samples, but if you are following along at home, feel free to just stick to your one sample. But if you want to join along, I highly recommend collecting another set of samples from a different location just to try things out. So here I have another sample, trying to break it apart. It's very different, very, very hard. I'm trying my hardest to just break it apart, it's kind of crumbling, and then as you can tell, the color is much darker than the first one. And then I'm using a lot of water and a lot of massaging for this one. So fast forward, lots of water, it's not budging no matter how hard I try. And this part is when I flung a huge bit into my room, so that made a huge mess. So this is going to take a lot longer than the first sample, which tells me a lot. You can tell that I'm using both hands this time instead of just the one. Switching from lots of water to a little bit of water, and then finally I have a sample that I can continue forward with the activity. But no worries if your sample gets to this stage or takes a lot longer or quicker. It just depends on what kind of soil you have. So, surprise! Here is my final soil that I have for you all today. Comparing it to the other two soil, I'm seeing larger clumps, kind of a redder, browner color, and then kind of sandier in my opinion. So we're gonna do the same thing as we did with the other soils to this soil. Same process, handful of soil, a spritz of water, going back and forth between the soil and the water, and then just massaging it until you're getting to a really good consistency. So please do not rush. I fast forward it. Just repeat the process as much as possible, and remember to dry your hands because that's the most important process for this to attain the desirable texture for the soils. So there you have it, folks. We now have our sample for the soil ribboning. I have 3 samples here. Again, feel free to just stick to the one that you have at home. And yeah, so I'm going to be going through a step-by-step process. You can definitely print out the sheet online I have here. It's going to give you a nice chart to follow along with, to keep in mind about what you're looking forward to when you're determining what kind of soil you have, what it's happening with your hands, how long the soil ribboning is forming, and then here I have my makeshift ruler that I made. Of course, if you have a protractor or a ruler, so you just need a couple of inches to continue on with this activity. So starting off with my first sample, I'm going to brush off any particles that are hanging onto it because you want to do any cross-contamination. A really clean surface and clean hands, really important for this activity. So using my forefinger, which is my pointer finger, and my thumb, we're just going to start ribboning. So what I like to do is use the inner hook of my finger, like I'm showing you here, kind of make like a little pirate R to it, and then using the base of my thumb. The width of my finger is going to really allow me to control the width and the length of my soil ribboning, and just to keep everything consistent as I'm pushing it upward. So as you can tell here, I'm pushing it with my thumb at an upward motion, and then here I am showing you where a breakage is forming in my soil. So measuring it out, it looks about 2.5 inches about. So what you're looking for is a small breakage into the soil ribboning. So it doesn't have to be a complete break, but something that will be unstable for the soil to hold together. That's what you're looking for in this case. Remind you that you're going to need clean hands for my second set of soil. And here I am just going at it with my thumb and forefinger, pushing the soil with my thumb at an upward motion. As you can tell, I'm keeping it consistent. You can really tell that my thumb is flexing And I'm making a lot of grunting noises right now because this is a really hard soil to ribbon and push through. This was my second soil going back into the video. It was the darker one. So here you have it. It measures around like 4 inches, maybe a little bit more or less than that. But as you can tell, it's greater than 2.5 inches, and I don't really feel any sand or grittiness into it. So I'm going to consider this just to be clay. So final sample, again, clean hands, and we're gonna repeat the process at an upward motion. This one goes a lot quicker, as you can tell. It broke off immediately when I started ribboning. It's making a huge mess, leaving large particles everywhere, and try and brush things off so I can pull out the chart, and kind of feels a grittiness to it. Using our visual cue, I can tell that is leaving behind a residue. See that color, brownish color, it's flaking off of my skin. And then that one piece that broke off, it is smaller than 1.25 inch. And then using a small piece of it, I'm filling it around with my finger. And I would say that sand is dominant in this sample, leading me to believe that it is sandy loam. So that concludes this activity, and I hope you all learned something new about soil or soil texture and how that all influences our environment and our surrounding community, and then how you may use soil in your day-to-day life. Please follow along with this video if you can from your home, and then stay safe as much as possible. Keep in mind what you're learning. Please tell me different things that you've learned or different techniques that you picked up on. If you found out more soil or did comparisons like I did, I would love to hear how that went for you. And I hope you all enjoyed this.